Hey everybody, and welcome to Q&A Wednesday, where I answer the questions that I get most commonly from my clients. So, of course, I'm inside again today because even though it's better outside, it's still not great. I think they said the other day the air outside was the equivalent of smoking 9 cigarettes or some ridiculousness. It's just been really bad up here in Washington State. So I'm still inside, although I'd love to be outside. So I'm just kind of sad. But I'm also sad because winter's coming and it's starting to get cold at night, which again, I love to open my window at night and I can't do that either. So a little frustrated there, but have a really great topic today because I find that this is something that has become a lot more popular, talking about things that are gluten-free and whether or not you should be gluten-free. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's probably important that you are, and we're going to kind of intermingle that with a couple of other things. And I'm going to try to make this as simple and as understandable as possible because, of course, once you start talking biology, you can get into some really detailed information. But I'm just going to try to give you the overall piece of information. I have actually been predominantly gluten-free for a while because I do have an autoimmune disease, unfortunately. I was told about 4 years ago that I have Hashimoto's, and actually once I was diagnosed, it made a lot of sense because I was spending winters just miserable. No, I wasn't just cold. I was miserable. You can ask anybody that I worked with. I would wear blankets to work. I would be that cold. So I don't do a lot of gluten. And there is some information behind that and autoimmune diseases and why that happens. And we'll cover that briefly as well today. But we want to talk about whether or not that's a choice that you should make. The mainstream media information, even when you go to some of the medical websites, really talk about how it's, yes, there are some people that, if you do have a celiac disease, then it's probably not for you, but they really fail to do some deep digging and understand the underlying issues with what damage gluten does to a body and kind of where we've come to. There's some other things that have come to light over the last decade when it comes to like leaky gut, irritable bowel syndrome, and a lot of things that it really doesn't get talked about. And unfortunately, all of these things can predominantly be prevented if we're eating correctly. But because the standard American diet we all talk about that. We know that this pandemic has really kind of highlighted that we're all sitting around and eating a bunch of garbage and doing Netflix and chill, right? So, if you've put on the quarantine 15, there's something behind that. And I don't know that most people understand the downsides of, a gluten part of your diet. So, years ago, I read a book called Wheat Belly, which is by, and I have his name, Dr. William Davis, who is a cardiologist. And I also have read multiple books by Dr. David Perlmutter, who's really, really good. He's got a lot of stuff on YouTube. You can watch both of them, and you can get a lot more detailed if you choose to. But I'm going to kind of give you the gist of it and why it might be a good idea to not just avoid gluten, but be careful what you're choosing gluten-free with as well. Because again, just because something's organic doesn't make it healthy. And it's the same thing with gluten-free. Just because it's a product that's gluten-free, hi Leanna, does not necessarily equal healthy, right? So, one of the questions that I heard somebody ask on one, again, I listen to so many podcasts. Like, you can ask my kids. They're like, Mom, you got your earphones in again? Dude, I just geek out on this stuff because the more I learn, the more frustrated I get that this is what we've been taught, and that we're taught that it's okay. And moderation in all things, yeah, you could say that, but that's kind of like saying, a few cigarettes a day are just okay. It's like a little bit of cocaine every day is okay. Really, come on, let's rethink that a little bit. It really comes down to how healthy do you really want to be, but it's totally unfortunate. I remember when I thought eating a sandwich was a great option, right? And it was wheat bread, so I was fine. It wasn't white bread, it was wheat bread. Well, wheat bread is not exactly as healthy as, they make that out to think. And even the Dave's Killer bread and even Ezekiel bread, although it's a much, much better option because it is sprouted, still has some downsides. So again, I think it's important just with everything, especially that's going on right now, in everything, we just want to be told the truth so that we can make our own decisions and then base our choices and our futures on what we choose, not, mistakenly think that something's healthy. And then years down the road, we get to the point where like, oh my gosh, what I did in my 20s and 30s has now significantly affected me now in my 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I think that that's something that, most of us don't understand. We just think, well, I just got away with it in my 20s. No, it was building up. It was building up in your system, and now it's doing some significant damage, and now you can't figure out why, right? So that's really kind of important things to remember. It's if you notice that this is the cost of the low-fat diet, that we've had for what they've promoted for the last 3 decades, right? Kind of in the early 90s, right? They started talking about fat causes fat, and so let's eat low fat. And so we embarked on this whole journey of eating like pretzels and bagels, thinking we were doing the healthy right thing. And unfortunately, it's created the obesity epidemic and the metabolic syndrome that we are dealing with as a world today, because of course a lot of countries now are adopting our behaviors and our habits, and that is seriously not a good thing. So, we like to think ourselves as the best, and let me tell you, sometimes, that's, it depends on what we're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about this. Ask all the questions that you want. I can't tell you I'll know everything, but if I don't know something, I actually will tell you I don't know, and it gives us a great jumping off point to go do some research. So let's talk about wheat in general, and of course we'll break it down a little bit. We'll talk about the proteins that it contains and what that does and why it's probably not the best idea for the majority of us, not just people with sensitivities or with the celiac disease, but it can actually, if you know somebody that has irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, I mean, there's some serious, even things like rheumatoid arthritis can definitely be something that has been caused by damage to our body through some of the proteins that come in gluten. So unfortunately, if we look back, our ancestors, 100, 200, thousands of years ago, ate a lot of wheat. Like, it became part of the food process of hunter-gatherers. The unfortunate thing today is that the wheat that we have today is not the same that our ancestors had thousands of years ago. Between things that, things when they got crossbred, and then of course things are GMO today, it's just not the same thing. And so, the products that they had way back then just do not resemble what we have now. And of course, majority of what wheat is used for becomes part of a processed food. And we know that processed food in general, well, it's already processed. So it tends to hit our bloodstream faster as sugar, especially if it's processed carbohydrates. It raises our blood sugar and causes all sorts of issues. And it's really, I'm seriously still flabbergasted at how often we're told to eat approximately 60% of our calories in carbohydrates. Again, like, that doesn't make sense to me, especially if you are trying to burn fat or lean out, or even just to remain optimally healthy. Now, if you're trying to grow, you're trying to grow muscle, there's some different formulas that we follow, but in general, that does not entail processed food or processed carbohydrates. So again, that's such a downside to what we should be eating. Now, I know if you guys remember, again, I'm 45, almost 46. So I really remember the food pyramid, and that the bottom was 6 to 11 servings of pastas, breads, cereals, and whole grains. Yeah, it's not only the two food pyramids, but even the current myplate.gov, if you look at both cereals and grains and fruits, and technically vegetables are a carbohydrate, but because they're so nutrient dense and a lot of fiber, it's not really the same thing. But if you look at even myplate.gov, a good portion of it is still carbohydrates. Now, let's talk about the fact that if your body prefers to burn I know we're going to get to gluten in just a second. Your body prefers to burn carbohydrates for fuel. If you are trying to burn fat, but you're predominantly getting the majority of your food or your energy through carbohydrates, why would your body tap into fat stores for fuel? It won't, right? So we talk a lot about, when I work with people, especially if they are not just overweight, but even into the obese category, that we really have to teach our bodies to become fat adapted and to use fat as fuel. So of course, our carbohydrates shouldn't be at 60%. I'm again always flabbergasted at how high they rate those. Now, if you've listened to any of my stuff, you've probably heard me say that the different macronutrients, now if you're unsure what I'm talking about, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, water, alcohol, but we talk about that the different macronutrients do different things biologically in your body. So you can't just, the calories are calories, right? But that doesn't do enough. You have to actually look at what they're coming from according to your goals, and of course quality matters. So back to the fact that wheat is not the same as it used to be. They really kind of focus that food pyramid on the fact that that portion of the pasta, cereals, breads, whatever, is supposed to deliver vitamins such as B, fiber, and different minerals to our system, we can get those other ways. There's other foods, like whole foods, that can deliver those things to us. And so, plus a lot of those products that they're talking about are enriched with vitamins, which means they're enriched with synthetic vitamins, which your body just doesn't treat the same as it does natural whole foods. So even if when you're looking for like a multivitamin, I always recommend that you're looking for something that is made with whole food so that you're getting the best option of a supplement that your body can actually process and utilize. So yeah, keep in mind that like vegetables themselves, if you tend to lean towards a predominantly plant-based diet, upsides and downsides to that. But if you're getting a lot of vegetables and things, then you're getting a good portion of the nutrients that you need. The problem with today's food in general is that it's void of all of those nutrients. So we're eating a bunch of what they call empty calories, right? If you think about it, and I've mentioned this more than once, if you think about somebody who is overweight or obese, they are malnutritioned because while they're getting a lot of calories, they're not getting a lot of nutrients, and our body runs on the nutrients, not just the calories. When we eat just the processed foods, our body tends to store those away and continue to look for the nutrients that it needs to run optimally. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the research when it comes down to autoimmune diseases. Now, not everybody's going to get an autoimmune disease, but there are some things that happen because of the gluten in the wheat. Now, the gluten is made, actually has two proteins in it, and I got to make sure I get this right, so I say it right. But one is called glutenin, and one is gliadin, okay? And so I'm not going to get too much into those, but let's just say that part of that can actually act as a toxin within your body. We've talked a lot in the last, almost decade now about the microbiome, which is such a huge part of your health. It's where your immune system is predominantly. And of course, there's a lot of things that affect it. And we're just on the cusp of all this crazy, amazing information, but it's not getting passed down to just the rest of us normal people fast enough so that we can make these changes early enough in our life that it doesn't affect us negatively. So the problem with these proteins is that they can act as toxins within our system, what they call intestinal toxins. So if you or somebody has, again, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, any sort of the digestive inflammational diseases, that could be coming from this. Because what happens with these proteins is that within the gut system, it creates permeability within the membranes of your gut. Then foreign objects start to get within your blood system and through your body that don't belong there. And because they don't belong there, your body starts to try and fix it and attack it, and it usually ends up attacking other things. So again, inflammation is one of those signs. Now, inflammation isn't always a bad thing. We talk about that as being something super negative, which it can, especially if it persists too long. But inflammation is there to protect us so that when we have a cut or something, an injury or something happens where our body needs to take care of it, the inflammation is the signal to the rest of the body, hey, we have a problem. The problem comes when we have inflammation, like a low-grade inflammation throughout our body, that can actually transition into diseases. So again, you kind of just got to know, to keep it really super easy, the more crap we eat, right, the bigger problems that we may have in our future. So when it comes to the gluten portion of this, because it disrupts our microbiome so much and causes these issues, we can actually have, and it might not be early in our lives. You normally see that a lot of these diseases come later in life, and then we kind of can't figure out, like, what am I doing right now that causes that? It's what you've done for the last 4, 5, 6 decades that might be causing that problem. So, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus. I personally think that fibromyalgia falls somewhere in there. Like I said, it was ulcerative colitis, dementia, and Alzheimer's. Did you know that Alzheimer's has this really interesting nickname of type 3 diabetes? I find that fascinating. So you have to understand that there's some overlapping here. It's not just the fact that gluten itself can be a problem, and I believe it is a problem, but also what they take this product, the wheat, into to create is also the problem, because it's usually something like bread or beer. Bread itself, right, pastas and cereals and things like that, even, we're not even talking necessarily sugary cereals, but even something like, let's just say Cheerios, right? Because of the way it's designed, that product breaks down into pure sugar in your system extremely fast because it's a processed food. Your body doesn't have to work hard to process it. So it's not just the fact, it doesn't even matter if it says multigrain, guys. Like if it contains the gluten, the problems are twofold. You've got the gluten that can create all these problems within your system of the gut permeability, but then you also have the sugar breakdown that not only raises spikes your blood sugar and raises your insulin, but over time, that actually wears your pancreas out because that's where you produce the insulin. So again, over decades of eating these foods, thinking that they're healthy, these create extremely negative effects in your body. And a lot of times we just don't know where they come from, but it literally is from decades of eating these processed foods that contain the gluten and the sugars. Okay. I just want to make sure I cover everything. I take lots of notes. Like I said, I geek out on this stuff, guys. I'm so sorry. So that it can cause the inflammation in two ways, right? They know that sugar causes inflammation and addiction, but here's kind of an interesting fact to that. The studies show that these proteins that come from gluten actually affect your opiate centers, and also create addiction. So on top of the sugar addiction, now you have a gluten opioid addiction, believe it or not. And again, if you want some more details on that, go listen to Dr. William Davis. He's the author of Wheat Belly, because he talks in depth about this. So not only are we addicted to sugar, but then we're addicted to the breads and the pastas and the cereals, and we eat it and we're not full and we want more. And they say that when you eat those foods, they have found that people on average eat between 400 and 800 extra calories per day, every day, because we just want more and more and more, right? So it's unfortunate that we're almost a victim of the big food industry because they know this and they play on this to keep us coming back to buy more. But unfortunately, you can't be the victim. You have to take control of that, be your own advocate, and you have to educate yourself. I've talked about that before. So let's talk about, we talked a little bit about that grains, wheat, they are a carbohydrate. So it does raise blood sugar. And over time, again, decades of that causes visceral fat. And you know that visceral fat that predominantly centers in the midsection causes a lot of those metabolic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease. That's unfortunate that a lot of what we hear is still antiquated information. Even though new information has come to light, we've got a lot of the nutrition and science part of the world that's still entrenched in this whole let's eat low fat, avoid saturated fat, red meat is bad for you. There's more information, and we need to be updating that as this information comes out. And kind of like everything else, a lot of times the truth kind of stays hidden because it doesn't benefit some of these big companies. So you have to do your own research. So let's talk a little bit. I know I get asked this a lot, and in the beginning I didn't really understand how it played a role. We're talking about lectins now, and I do now. So again, it's taken me, I've educated myself over the last decade because I find it so interesting. And although I did start to go back to school to become a registered dietitian, I really wasn't happy with the approach that they had and how long it would take, and the ability that I maybe wouldn't even have that option of having an internship to do what I want to do when I have the ability to educate myself because I read a ton. And again, I'm not just reading like random. I'm not learning this from Instagram. I am watching doctors, listening to highly respected doctors and scientists on this. So I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. Now, one of the really things I've noticed over time is that a lot of times I'll come up with this theory, and of course I won't talk about it necessarily until I can substantiate it. But when that scientific information comes out, I'm super excited to be able to say, yeah, like if you eat too many carbs, you can't burn fat. I mean, now it makes sense, but at the time I had to figure out how that was true. So let's talk a little bit about lectins. Now, again, lectins are a plant's way of defending itself. So a lot of times, the plant will have a chemical structure in order to prevent other things from eating it. And that it could be bugs, it could be spores, it could be bacteria, it can be some different things. Well, of course, some of you may not be able to eat nightshade vegetables because, of course, the lectins in it tend to disturb your gut. So keep that in mind. So really where wheat falls in there is somewhere in between. And like some of them are benign, some of them are highly toxic. Wheat and gluten falls somewhere in between. But that being said, it still creates a hostile enough environment within your gut, your microbiome, that it can cause some major issues. Making sure I cover everything. So the other thing, so that can be part of the situation with autoimmune and the gut permeability. So let's talk really quickly about the fact that wheat becomes a stimulant appetite. So again, we talked about how it actually, the proteins affect your opioid, I can't even think what it's called today. Sorry, guys. The portion of your brain that the receptors, opioid receptors, right? And so, unfortunately, because of the one protein of the wheat, that actually stimulates that. So you'll find that if you're eating a lot of like pastries, anything that does contain gluten, you tend to still be hungry. People say, well, isn't that the sugar? Yeah, but there's also a good portion. Like I said, if you're doing both, if you're getting both sugar and gluten, you're getting a double whammy. And that can be a huge issue. So just some tips, and I do want to give you some of the examples of things that can actually clear up if you start cutting gluten-free out of your diet. Now, here's the problem for most people. Again, you can't just go from eating like the gluten-filled breads and things like that to things that are gluten-free, but they're still highly processed, right? There's a lot of products out there that are like, oh, look, I'm gluten-free, but yet it's still full of sugar and it's still highly processed and it's still going to spike your blood sugar. So again, you have to be careful what your transition is. Now, it's not a bad idea to find healthier versions of things that you love. One of the things I do with my Saturday meals with Melissa is to find substitutes for things that we love. I love chocolate. Brownies are amazing, but I don't want the sugar and the gluten. So what can I do that gives me a sugar-free option using maybe almond or coconut flour that really stays low carb and high fiber? So there's ways to do that you can still get the things that you love. Now, I'm not saying that you can never eat them, but again, it's kind of like saying, smoke a cigarette every once in a while because it's not bad for you. It is. So you have to make that decision, but I can tell at this point how my body responds when I do eat something containing gluten. Now, here's the great thing. Most restaurants these days, as this information becomes more popular and people start to listen and understand, a lot of the restaurants are now very understanding and will offer gluten-free options, or sometimes you just have to ask. I like to order, a omelet at IHOP, but it says right on their menu that they add a scoop of pancake batter into it to make it fluffy. All I have to do is say, look, I have a gluten intolerance. Can you make sure that just use the eggs? And they're pretty good about that. Now, if you really have an extreme sensitivity to it, you may, and you're not sure, and a lot of times they can't answer it. They don't always know. A lot of people don't really understand. You might steer away from that, but it doesn't hurt to ask questions. Is this chicken breaded? Can you give me this but no toast? Or you can make those special requests, and most restaurants are good about it because they get it frequently. So that's not bad. But really, what I want to what I want you to get out of this is that your health is a choice, and I know I talk about that all the time. But it's not just a choice today, but what you choose to do today affects you for decades to come. And so by making better choices overall, you are preventing disease, having optimal health, and that is really super important. So like I said, don't just trade gluten-free stuff for other processed food, because you're still getting the downsides of your blood sugar spiking, the insulin having to take care of it, and then usually storing that as fat. But again, do find your healthier versions of that. The best option is to make your own. Really, it is, because then you know what's in it, and that's super important as well. So even if you are not gluten intolerant or don't think you're gluten intolerant, and you don't have, because celiac disease is actually not super common, it's still probably something that you should leave out of your regular nutrition in order to feel optimal and have optimal health. But the other problem is that it is in, hi Dad, good to see ya. You have to really pay attention, because gluten is just like sugar, gluten is in everything from tomato soup to Twizzlers licorice. That's so bizarre. So again, part of it is they want you to be addicted to it, like the sugar and the gluten. So you have to learn to read labels. I find it fun when somebody comes, well, what do you think about this? And I'm like, okay, well, show me the label. So the first thing they show me is the nutrition label. I'm like, no, I want to see the ingredient list. I don't even really look at the nutrition label anymore, to be honest, because it doesn't give me enough information. I want to see the ingredients that's in it. Now, how do we solve this issue with really trying to avoid gluten and sugar? It is to eat whole single ingredient foods, like, nuts, proteins. And again, red meat is not the problem, guys. It's what the protein eats. It's what the beef eats that's the protein. So if you're getting regular steak from your store that is grain fed, you are now getting problems. So, I always find it funny when they're like, well, we did research, and in this research, it showed that the hamburger was the problem. And I'm like, yeah, was that a hamburger with fries and a bun? Or what? Like, again, they're looking at one factor, but they're not taking all the variables into consideration. And that's really frustrating when I see that. Cut back on those things that you shouldn't have. Now, it's hard. I get it. I've had people come to me and say, look, I have irritable bowel syndrome. And I'm like, God, you got to cut out the beer. And I've had pushback. But again, it has to be your choice. Which do you want? Do you want to be miserable and have this issue and the symptoms that come from it? Or do you want to be healthy? So I get it. It's hard. It's hard. I have a sweet tooth. I get it. But you're going to have to start cutting out those things that can cause part of that. And if you're a parent, you're an example to your children. And if it's an issue for you, it may very well genetically be an issue for them. So teach them well, because you don't want them to go through those things that you've had to now go through. Again, eat single ingredient, real food, raw nuts, meats, eggs, especially, like, I know a lot of people, eggs can be allergenic, so you have to be careful there. Good oils. Fat is not a problem, guys. That's so got a bad rap. It's so been vilified, but healthy fats your brain is made up of, you've got to have fats. Your cells are made up of fats. So it really depends on the type of fats that you put in your body. So things, here's the deal, just try it. Just try it. If you find that you're having symptoms like fogginess, lethargy, and fatigue, and you're not sure where it's coming from, cut out gluten for 2 weeks. I highly recommend you cut out sugar too. You know how I feel about that. And see what happens. See if you have any of these things happen. Weight loss, actually, believe it or not. Reduced appetite, food obsession, blood sugar reduction, reduced joint pain. Seriously. Reduced blood pressure, reduction of your triglycerides, increased HDL, and reduced LDL. Of course, again, that's a topic for another day, but it's something your doctor may have talked about to you. That also has a lot to do with sugar intake, so keep that in mind. Increased energy and improved sleep. Seriously. Like, if you're struggling to sleep, that might be a great option. Cut these out. Less acid reflux and irritable bowel syndrome. So again, they're really starting to connect the dots on what this all affects. To me, it's just smart to just cut it out. Like, again, I know pizza's great, and I know you can go down and you can get a gluten-free crust. Depends on what's still in that crust. But they're getting to the point where they're starting to offer better options because they know that this is affecting so many of us. And we vote with our wallets. If we don't purchase it, they won't make it. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. Do you have any questions? Because I love questions. So again, this is one of those things that you're going to have to make a decision. It's so predominant, and it's something that really isn't talked enough about. And again, most of the information is so conflicting because it really says that, well, it's not really as big of a problem if you're not one of these small group of people. I really think it is. I think that we're seeing, and of course, the doctors don't really talk about prevention because they're not taught nutrition. So they're trying to put a Band-Aid on, a cut that's just bleeding profusely. They're not getting to the root of the problem. They're just trying to deal with the symptoms. So hopefully that helps. I just want to help you make some good choices because I want you to be educated on it and not have to guess. Because if you understand the basic truth of it, then you can make that choice yourself. That's where we're at. So I have a lot more free information and education. It's kind of fun. Go back and listen to my stuff from my beginning and then listen to my stuff now. Completely different. As I learn more, I try to educate everybody. And it's something that I do on a regular basis. Again, super happy the library's open. I've been reading like a crazy person. Yeah, podcasts and books. Huge nerd. I'm okay with it, right? So having a great day. If you guys have any questions or things that you want to talk about, I do have a couple of topics that people have requested on, and it is coming. Some of them have somebody that's more expert than me. So some things are coming up in the next few weeks. Super excited about that. I know fall's coming, so I love Halloween. I'm hoping it's as fun as it usually is. I know it's been such a weird year. But if you have any questions, please ask. You can either leave a comment below, or you can direct message me through Facebook or Instagram Messenger. I do respond. I meet some great people that way too, which I really love. I just want you to be happy and healthy, and I want you to know how to best take care of your body and not have to guess. So have an incredible evening, you guys. Until next week, that is Q&A Wednesday. Have a good night and stay healthy, my friends. Oh, and Lynette says cauliflower crust is yummy. I agree. Have a good one.